Then maybe you and your kid belong in coach. The woman said it loud enough for 6 rows to hear. Her manicured hand snatched the little toy jet from Ethan's fingers before the boy could pull it back. She shoved it into the seat pocket and looked at Daniel's grease-marked sleeve like it had offended her personally. "You people always make premium cabins feel cheap," she said. Ethan froze. Daniel did not. That was what made the woman narrow her eyes. Most men would have argued right away. Some would have apologized. Some would have puffed up and tried to prove something. Daniel Carter did none of that. He just looked at the toy fighter jet buried halfway inside the pocket, then at his son, then back at the woman with a stillness that felt wrong for a tired mechanic in worn boots. Because 30,000 feet in the air was a bad place to discover you had mocked the wrong man. And the worst part for her was this. Daniel still had not answered. The trouble started before the plane even left the gate. Daniel had boarded late with Ethan half asleep on his shoulder and a duffel bag digging into his arm. He had come straight from a repair shop outside Fort Worth after working far too many hours under diesel engines. His knuckles were dark with old grease that no amount of scrubbing ever fully removed. His back ached. His eyes burned. He had almost missed the flight to Washington, and only Ethan's small voice saying, "We made it, Dad," had kept him moving. Their seats were in the front cabin. That alone had drawn looks. Daniel knew the looks. He had known them for years. People saw the boots, the rough hands, the tired face, and made a neat little story in their minds. Wrong neighborhood, wrong income, wrong seat, wrong life. He ignored them. Ethan did not understand them yet, but he felt them. The boy climbed into the window seat and pressed his face to the glass with his toy F-22 in hand. The plane was old and scratched and missing one tiny wheel. A strip of tape held one wing in place. To Ethan, it was perfect. "My mom picked this one because she said it looked fast even when it was standing still," he whispered. Daniel swallowed. "She was right," he said. "That should have been the end of it. A quiet father, a quiet boy, a tired evening flight." Then the woman arrived. She wore a sharp charcoal suit that looked expensive in a way Daniel had stopped noticing years ago. Her carry-on matched her heels. Her watch probably cost more than his truck. She stopped in the aisle, looked at Daniel, looked at Ethan, then looked at her boarding pass like the airline had insulted her. "Row 3, she asked. Daniel moved his knees in. "Aisle seat's yours." She did not sit at once. Her eyes dropped to Daniel's hands, then to Ethan's toy, then back to Daniel. "Did they run out of standards when they sold these tickets?" she asked. Daniel looked at her calmly. "I bought mine same as you." A man across the aisle glanced up from his phone. The woman gave a thin smile, clearly. She sat down with a sigh that sounded rehearsed. Then she wiped the armrest with a sanitizing cloth. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan watched every second of it. Children noticed cruelty faster than adults. They just did not always have names for it. Ethan tried anyway. "Hi," he said softly. "I'm Ethan." The woman opened her laptop. Ethan tried again. "Do you like jets?" No answer. He held up the toy. "This one's an F-22 Raptor. My mom gave it to me." The woman finally turned. Her expression did not soften, it hardened. And then came the line that changed the whole flight. "Keep your cheap little toy to yourself," she snapped. Before Ethan could react, she took the jet from his hand and shoved it into the seat pocket. The cabin went quiet in that strange, thin way public moments sometimes did. Not silent, just listening. Ethan stared at the pocket. His lower lip trembled once, that was all. Daniel leaned forward, reached into the pocket, and pulled out the toy with careful fingers. He checked the taped wing first. Then he placed it back in Ethan's hands. "You're okay, buddy," he said. The woman gave a short laugh. "Then maybe teach him some manners. Business class is not a daycare." Daniel turned his head. There was no heat in his voice. That made it worse. "He's 7, he said. "He's holding a toy. He was waving it in my space. He was showing you something he loves." He was interrupting me. Daniel studied her face for a second longer than most people could handle. "No," he said. "He was being a child." The woman straightened in her seat. "Do you know who I am?" Daniel looked back at Ethan first. The boy was clutching the little plane to his chest now, shoulders drawn in, making himself smaller. Daniel had seen that before, at school, in grocery lines, at birthday parties where other parents smiled too tightly. Then Daniel looked at the woman. "No, ma'am," he said, "and that isn't the problem here." Color rose in her face. "I am Victoria Ashford, Senior Vice President at Harmon Defense Systems." Daniel gave one slow nod. "Good for you." Her jaw tightened. "I work with generals, procurement boards, program directors. I help decide where billions of dollars go." "Then you should be impressive enough without bullying a child." The man across the aisle coughed into his fist to hide a laugh. Victoria heard it. Her eyes flashed cold. "I knew it," she said. "This is exactly what happens when airlines try to be inclusive instead of selective." Daniel felt Ethan go still beside him. That did it. Not enough for anger, enough for truth. Daniel turned fully toward her now. His face stayed calm, but his eyes lost something soft. "You looked at my hands before you looked at my son," he said. "You saw my boots, my jacket, my job. Then you decided who we were. That's your mistake, not ours." Victoria folded her arms. "Men like you always think dignity is the same as entitlement." Daniel almost smiled. It was not a happy smile. "Men like me." He repeated. She held his gaze. "You know exactly what I mean." "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "I do." A flight attendant appeared near the row, drawn by the tension. "Is everything all right here?" Victoria answered first. "No, this section is already uncomfortable, and now I'm being spoken to aggressively." Daniel looked up at the attendant. "My son showed her his toy plane. She took it from him." The attendant blinked. "Ma'am." Victoria lifted her chin. The child was disrupting the cabin. Ethan looked down at the toy in his lap like he wished it would disappear. Daniel hated that look more than he hated insults. The attendant shifted awkwardly. "Sir, if we could just keep things calm before departure." Daniel nodded once. "We are calm." Victoria let out a disbelieving breath. Unbelievable. Then Ethan spoke. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken enough to split Daniel wide open. "Dad," he whispered, "should I put it away because she doesn't want us here?" Daniel turned so fast the seat belt buckle bit into his side. "No," he said, too fast, too sharp. He softened at once and put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "No, buddy, listen to me. We belong wherever our tickets say we belong. Understand?" Ethan nodded, but his eyes were wet now. Victoria looked away first. Maybe she felt shame. Maybe she felt nothing. Daniel no longer cared which. He leaned closer to Ethan and lowered his voice. "You keep that jet out if you want. Nobody gets to make you feel small for loving something your mom gave you." Ethan stared at him. "Really? Really?" The boy wiped one eye with his sleeve and held the toy tighter. The plane pushed back from the gate. Cabin lights dimmed. Engines rose into a deep, steady hum beneath the floor. For most passengers, it was just another takeoff. For Daniel, sounds like that still lived in his bones. He heard things other people missed. The balance, the pull, the rhythm beneath the metal. He had spent years teaching himself not to react to it. Years pretending certain sounds belonged to another man's life. But now Ethan was leaning against him with a toy raptor in his hands and a hurt he did not deserve in his chest. And Victoria Ashford was sitting beside them, still stiff with superiority, still certain she understood exactly what kind of man Daniel Carter must be. She had no idea that the last time Daniel had heard a cockpit go quiet before trouble, men on the ground had lived because he made the right call in under 3 seconds. She had no idea that he had buried one life already. Or that tonight, before this flight was over, the whole cabin was going to learn what kind of man sat in row 3. And when they did, the first person forced to face it would be the woman who told his son to stay in coach. The first 20 minutes passed in a silence that did not feel peaceful. Victoria typed on her laptop with hard, angry taps. Ethan sat by the window with the toy jet in both hands, no longer flying it, only holding it. Daniel watched the reflection of his son in the glass and hated how careful the boy had become. 7-year-olds were not supposed to measure every breath around strangers. They were supposed to be loud sometimes, curious often, a little messy, a little annoying, alive. The drink service started. A flight attendant rolled the cart down the aisle with the practiced smile of someone who had seen too many bad tempers in too small a space. Daniel ordered apple juice for Ethan and black coffee for himself. He needed sleep more than coffee, but sleep was not coming. It had not come in a long time. Victoria asked for sparkling water without looking up from her screen. When the attendant handed Ethan his juice, the boy whispered, "Thank you," then held the cup with both hands. Daniel saw the effort in that too. Everything the kid did now was careful, quiet, reduced. It made something dark move in Daniel's chest. He leaned toward Ethan. "You can relax, buddy." Ethan gave a small nod. "I'm trying." Daniel put his hand over the boy's fist for 1 second, just enough. "You don't have to try that hard." Victoria heard it. Daniel knew she heard it because her shoulders tightened, but she kept her eyes on her screen. Then Ethan made the mistake of being a child again. He lifted the toy jet and flew it through one slow, silent turn above his tray table. No sound, no bumping, no drama, just one little arc through the air. Victoria snapped her laptop shut. "This is absurd." Daniel turned his head. She looked directly at the flight attendant still standing nearby. "I asked for a professional cabin, not this." The attendant glanced down. "Ma'am, he's being very quiet. He is playing with a broken toy in my workspace." Daniel answered before the attendant could try smoothing it over again. "Then maybe stop treating a plane like your private office." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "I'm trying to finish a briefing that matters." Daniel looked at Ethan's toy. "And he's trying to hold on to the last thing his mother gave him." That landed, not because Victoria suddenly became kind, because it gave the whole row context. The man across the aisle lowered his newspaper. A woman 1 row ahead glanced back. The attendant's face changed too, not pity, something quieter, understanding maybe. Victoria recovered fast, but not fast enough. "I didn't know that," she said. Daniel held her gaze. "You didn't ask." For a moment she had no answer. Then the captain came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard, announcing flight time, weather near Washington, the usual calm voice that told passengers the machine around them was in good hands. Daniel listened automatically. Voice steady. No strain. No problem. Still, he noticed little things. The delay before takeoff. A slight pause in engine spool. The way the plane held longer than usual before rotation. Small stuff. Maybe nothing. Probably nothing. He looked out the window past Ethan's face and saw the runway lights streaking by. Then the nose lifted. The climb pressed them back into their seats. Ethan smiled in spite of himself. "I like this part." Daniel let himself smile too. "I know." The city dropped away below them. The cabin settled. Seat belt sign stayed on through light chop. Normal enough. Victoria reopened her laptop. Daniel tried to close his eyes for a minute, but Ethan tugged his sleeve. "Dad." "Yeah." "Was Mom scared on planes?" The question came from nowhere, the way grief always did. Daniel kept his voice even. "Sometimes a little." "What did she do?" "She held my hand and pretended she wasn't." Ethan looked down at the toy. "I do that too." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah, buddy, I know." The engines droned. The cabin lights dimmed a little more. Somewhere behind them a baby cried, then stopped. The ordinary music of air travel wrapped around row 3. Then the first jolt hit. Not hard, just enough to shake cups and make heads lift. A few passengers glanced up. The second jolt came sharper. A woman near the front grabbed her armrest. Overhead bins rattled once. The flight attendant braced a hand on the drink cart. "Just a little turbulence," she said. Daniel listened. Not the jolt, the sound underneath it. The left engine had changed. Only slightly, enough that most people would never notice, but Daniel noticed. The tone wavered, corrected, then wavered again. Not catastrophic, not yet, but wrong. His whole body went still. He did not look panicked. He looked focused, and somehow that was worse. Victoria noticed. "What is it?" Daniel did not answer right away. He tilted his head a fraction, feeling through the seat, listening through metal and air and memory. Another shudder. Then the captain's voice returned. It was controlled, too controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a systems issue and will be making a precautionary diversion. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Flight crew, secure the cabin." Whispers broke out all at once. A man too rose back, said, "What kind of systems issue?" Someone else asked for a phone signal, as if panic could be solved by bars on a screen. The flight attendants moved faster now. Victoria's face drained of color. Ethan turned to Daniel so quickly his toy jet dropped into his lap. "Dad, are we going to crash?" Daniel took the boy's face gently in one hand. "No." Not maybe, not probably, just no. The certainty in his voice cut through the noise better than the intercom had. Ethan searched his eyes. "Promise." Daniel listened again to the engine tone, the angle of descent, the way the aircraft corrected slightly left and then steadied. He counted seconds in his head, felt the weight shift. "They're already working the problem," he said. "The pilots know what they're doing." Victoria stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" He looked at her once. "Because they're following the right sequence." Her breathing got faster. "What does that mean?" "It means the plane is still flying like it's supposed to." He kept one arm around Ethan. "It means panic won't help, so don't." She blinked at him like she had just met a different man in the same seat. The turbulence hit again, harder this time. A cup tipped over somewhere behind them. Somebody swore. Somebody prayed. The cabin no longer felt like a premium space or a cheap one. It just felt human, fragile, equal. Victoria gripped Daniel's forearm without thinking. He looked down at her hand. She pulled it back at once, ashamed. "I am sorry." For the hand or the rest of it? Her mouth opened, closed, both. Daniel had no time for that now. The plane banked. He felt it in his spine before he saw it in the wing angle. Controlled descent, not freefall, not chaos. They were going somewhere specific. Ethan's fingers dug into his sleeve. "Dad." "I'm here." "You're not scared?" Daniel looked at the window, then at the overhead panel, then back at his son. "I am paying attention." That answer seemed to calm Ethan more than anything else could have. The woman across the aisle leaned over. "Sir, do you know what's happening?" Daniel could have lied, could have said he was just guessing. Instead, he gave them the kindest truth available. "I think we have an engine or systems issue, but the crew has control. We are descending early and clean. That's good." The man across the aisle swallowed. "How do you know?" Daniel gave the smallest shrug. "I've been around aircraft." Victoria stared at him harder now, not with contempt, with need. The seat belt sign stayed on. The plane dropped lower through cloud. The sound from the left side wavered again and then stabilized enough to ease the knot in Daniel's chest. Enough at least to know this was survivable if nothing else stacked on top of it. He bent close to Ethan's ear. "When we land, I want you to count with me, okay?" "Count what?" "The seconds until we stop. Gives your brain a job." Ethan nodded quickly. "Okay." It was an old trick. Give fear a task and it shrank. Victoria heard that too. Her voice came small now, stripped of title and posture and sharp edges. "Can I count too?" Daniel looked at her. This woman who had humiliated his son. This woman who now looked like any other frightened person trapped in the sky. He did not let her off the hook, but he did not punish her either. "Yeah," he said, "you can count." For the first time since boarding, Victoria Ashford obeyed him without argument. The plane dropped lower. The landing gear thudded into place. Gasps moved through the cabin. Daniel tightened his arm around Ethan. "Now," he said quietly, "start counting." And as the runway rushed up to meet them, every person in row 3 understood the same thing at once. The dirty-handed mechanic was not guessing. He was reading the sky. 1. Ethan's voice shook. 2. Victoria whispered the number beside him. 3. The wheels slammed onto concrete. Not soft, not elegant, hard enough to jerk every shoulder forward, hard enough to make a few people cry out, but controlled, completely controlled. Reverse thrust roared, the cabin rattled. A bag fell from an overhead bin somewhere behind them. Then came the long, hard deceleration that told Daniel the pilots had chosen a shorter runway than normal or a more aggressive stop than passengers were used to. He counted 2, not out loud. Distance, speed, bleed. Brake pressure, rudder correction. The aircraft pulled slightly left, corrected, then rolled straight. Good pilots, very good pilots. By the time Ethan reached 10, the worst was over. By 15, the plane had slowed enough for people to start breathing again. At 22, they were taxiing. The cabin exploded into applause. Not everyone clapped because they were impressed. Some clapped because they were scared and needed somewhere to put the fear. Some laughed too loudly. Some wiped their faces and stared at their laps. One man across the aisle crossed himself 3 times in a row. Ethan looked up at Daniel. "We didn't crash." Daniel touched his hair. "Told you." Victoria still had one hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wet now. All the hard polish was gone. She looked younger without it. Or maybe just more honest. The captain came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely at Carswell Air Reserve Base as a precaution. Please remain seated while we coordinate with ground personnel. We appreciate your cooperation." Carswell, Daniel's heartbeat changed, not from fear, from recognition. He looked out the window past Ethan's shoulder. Gray runway, harsh sunlight, military vehicles in the distance. Concrete fences, heat shimmer. And farther off, almost too far to be sure at first, angular shapes parked in a line. Ethan pressed both hands to the glass. "Dad." Daniel already saw them. 6 dark silhouettes with a shape no pilot ever forgot. F-22s, real ones. Sunlight slid along their edges like steel. Ethan made the smallest sound Daniel had ever heard from him. Not a word, just wonder. "Are those?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "Real Raptors." "Yeah." The boy turned so fast his seatbelt pulled him back. His eyes were huge, wet, alive. For a moment the pain of earlier vanished completely. Daniel should have been relieved. Instead, something old and buried moved inside him like it had just been woken by its name. He had not stood this close to a Raptor flight line in 3 years. Not since Sarah got sick. Not since hospital rooms replaced mission briefs. Not since flight suits turned into work shirts and checklists turned into repair invoices, and men stopped calling him Hawk 1 because nobody around him knew that name at all. He stared out the window and felt the old life reach for him. It happened so fast he almost hated it. Victoria saw his face change. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Daniel did not answer, because the truth was too big and he was too tired, and if he let even one piece of it out he was not sure he could put it back. The plane turned slowly and came to a stop near a low military terminal. Ground crews moved fast outside. A bus rolled up. Uniforms everywhere, security vehicles, Air Force personnel. The passengers were told to stay seated. Nobody liked that. Questions started at once. How long will this take? Can we deplane? I have a connection. My meeting starts in 2 hours. Victoria found her voice before her dignity fully returned. I need a secure line and immediate onward transport, she said to nobody in particular. I cannot sit here all afternoon. Daniel kept looking out the window. One of the jets farther down the line was being serviced with a panel open near the intake. Crew chiefs moved around it with easy purpose. Even from here, Daniel could tell by the body language which ones were new and which ones had been doing it long enough to trust their instincts. Maintenance had a rhythm. Flying had one too. Good crews could see each other from a distance. He almost smiled. Then he stopped himself. Ethan leaned in. Dad, did you ever see one this close before? Daniel's silence lasted too long. His son noticed. You did, Ethan whispered. Daniel finally looked at him. Yeah. How close? The answer sat right there. One truthful sentence away, he chose the safer version. Very close. Victoria turned slowly toward him. You said you've been around aircraft. Daniel looked back out the window. I have. The cabin door opened at last. Warm Texas air pushed in. A flight attendant began directing passengers out by row. People grabbed bags and phones and dignity in whatever order they could manage. Daniel let the others hurry first. He always did. Across the aisle, the older man with the veteran's cap paused before stepping out. He looked at Daniel for a second, then at Ethan, then back at Daniel. Son, he said quietly, whatever you used to do around aircraft, I figured one thing out during that landing. Daniel waited. The man nodded once. You weren't scared because you'd heard worse. Then he moved on. Daniel said nothing, but Victoria heard every word. When it was finally their turn, Ethan stood in the aisle clutching the toy raptor in one hand and Daniel's hand in the other. Victoria followed behind them in her heels, slower now, less sharp, still shaken by what had happened and perhaps more shaken by the man beside her than the emergency itself. They stepped into the small terminal and the world changed again. No carpeted airport shine. No polished retail storefronts. No duty-free lights. This place was concrete floors, bolted chairs, humming fluorescent panels, vending machines that looked older than Ethan, and a folding table where frazzled airline staff tried to invent order out of fear and delay. A few military police stood by the far wall. Passengers filled the room with overlapping frustration. Phones came out. Voices rose. Deadlines returned. Survival was already being converted back into inconvenience. Victoria headed straight for the airline table. Of course she did. Daniel sat Ethan near a wall where they could see out to the flight line through a strip of reinforced glass. The boy planted both palms on the chair and stared outside like he had been dropped into heaven. Can we stay here? Ethan asked. Daniel sat beside him for a little while. Can we touch one? No. Can we look at one for a very long time? Daniel let out one tired breath that almost became a laugh. That maybe. At the folding table, Victoria's voice cut through the room. This is not acceptable. I need transport now. A gate agent, already losing the battle, tried to stay polite. Ma'am, we're arranging a replacement aircraft. Estimated delay is 2 to 3 hours. 2 to 3 hours? Yes, ma'am. I have federal stakeholders waiting in Washington. Yes, ma'am. I don't think you understand. The agent looked like she understood perfectly and simply lacked the authority to reshape reality. Daniel looked away. Ethan did not. She's still mean, the boy whispered. Daniel thought about disagreeing. He didn't. She's scared, he said instead. Sometimes scared people get louder. Ethan considered that. You didn't get loud. Daniel stared at the glass, at the distant fighters, at the old version of himself standing in memory where those jets now stood in sunlight. No, he said quietly. I didn't. The vending machine near the corner swallowed Daniel's first dollar and gave him nothing. He stared at it, then fed in another. This time it dropped pretzels and a bottle of water. Good enough. When he bent to pick them up, a voice beside him said, "Hit the lower left corner if you want the machine to respect you." Daniel turned. A young Air Force lieutenant stood there in a green flight suit, carrying a paper coffee cup and wearing the kind of easy confidence that came from flying things most people only saw in movies. Squadron patch, name tag, sunburn at the neck, barely 30, pilot. Daniel knew instantly what he flew before his eyes dropped to the patch. F-22. The lieutenant smiled a little. That machine's got attitude. Daniel gave the lower left corner one firm hit. A granola bar dropped free. Guess you were right. Usually am. The lieutenant took a sip of coffee. Then his eyes moved over Daniel with quick professional interest. Not judgment, assessment. You were on the diverted flight. Yeah, me and my son. Rough day. Daniel nodded. Could have been worse. The lieutenant glanced toward the window, then back at Daniel. You called the diversion before the captain finished announcing it. Daniel's hand paused on the vending machine slot, so the kid had been listening. I made an educated guess. That's so. Daniel picked up the granola bar, something like that. The lieutenant leaned a shoulder against the machine. Most passengers don't use phrases like systems issue and sequence and controlled descent unless they've got some background. Daniel gave him nothing. The pilot seemed amused. Fair enough, he said. I'm Jake Rowlands. He offered his hand. Daniel looked at it for half a beat, then shook. Daniel Carter. The name landed strangely. Jake's expression did not change much, but his eyes sharpened. A flicker only. Recognition trying to form and not getting there yet. Carter, he repeated. That's right. Huh. Daniel knew that sound too, the sound of a memory half awake. Jake looked down at Daniel's hands, grease in the knuckles, cracked skin, shop scars, then at the steel memorial band on Daniel's wrist, then back at his face. You're a mechanic? Jake asked. These days. These days, Jake repeated carefully. Daniel almost regretted saying it. Before the lieutenant could push further, Ethan called from the chairs. Dad, come look. One of them is moving. Daniel turned. One of the F-22s was being towed farther down the line, nose wheel guided by ground crew, sunlight flashing across the canopy. Jake looked at Ethan and smiled. Your kid likes Raptors. Ethan held up the toy without shame this time. It's my favorite plane in the world. Jake walked over with Daniel and crouched to Ethan's height. Good taste. It's an F-22, Ethan said, as if Jake might somehow have missed the point. Not an F-35. Jake pressed a hand to his chest like he had been personally defended. Kid, I already like you. Ethan pointed at the patch on Jake's suit. You fly them. Sometimes. Daniel looked at the lieutenant. Sometimes. Jake grinned, wanted to sound humble in front of the expert. That made Daniel go still. He turned his head slowly. Excuse me. Jake lifted one shoulder. Engine oscillation, compressor side. That's what you told yourself on the plane. I saw your face when the captain made the announcement. You weren't afraid. You were diagnosing. Victoria Ashford had walked back from the airline desk by then. She stopped 6 feet away, hearing the end of it. Daniel felt 3 pairs of eyes on him now. Jake's curious. Ethan's proud. Victoria's unsettled. He chose caution. I work around engines, he said. Jake nodded once, but he did not buy it. Sure. From somewhere beyond the restricted door at the back of the terminal came the muffled sound of men laughing. Boots on concrete. The ordinary life of a military base continuing as if 30 frightened civilians had not just dropped in from the sky. Jake took another sip of coffee. Well, Daniel Carter, mechanic these days, if your son wants a better view of the jets, there are some windows down the east hall that overlook the line. Ethan lit up at once. Really? Jake looked to Daniel for permission. Daniel hesitated, because old worlds were dangerous, because one glimpse had already woken too much in him, because sometimes it was easier to stay small than risk remembering your real size. Then Ethan tugged his sleeve. Please. Daniel looked down at the boy, then at the toy jet in his hand, then back toward the line of real Raptors outside. All right, he said, and Victoria, still standing there with her expensive suit and her shaken silence, watched the dirty-handed mechanic follow an F-22 pilot deeper into the terminal like the place belonged to him more than it ever belonged to her. The East Hall was quieter than the main terminal. Concrete walls, faded directional signs. A row of reinforced windows looking out over the flight line. Sunlight poured in hard and white, turning every aircraft edge into something sharp enough to cut. Ethan ran the last few steps and stopped at the glass with both hands pressed against it. Oh wow. It came out like prayer. The Raptors were closer here. Close enough to see crew ladders, open panels, ground carts, heat shimmer above the concrete. One pilot walked across the line with his helmet bag over one shoulder, and even from this distance Daniel knew the pace. Purposeful, loose, alert. Men who learned to look calm because panic got people killed. Jake Rowland stood beside Ethan and pointed through the glass. That one near the shelter is in post-flight maintenance. That one by the tow line is getting moved for inspection. And that one. He tapped lightly on the window. That one is mine. Ethan looked like someone had handed him the moon. You have your own Raptor. Jake lowered his voice. Technically, the United States government has its own Raptor. I just try not to embarrass it. Ethan laughed. Daniel stood 2 steps back, hands in his jacket pockets, trying not to look like the sight in front of him was peeling old scars open one by one. It was not working. The smell was not even here, only the sight, yet memory supplied the rest. Burn jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, sun on composite skin, helmet pressure, oxygen, the click of straps, the silence before launch when every sense sharpened and every useless thought fell away. 3 years gone in one glance. Victoria had followed them after all. Not close, not beside him, just near enough to watch without intruding. There was no arrogance left in her posture now, only discomfort, the kind that came when a person realized the world had more depth than the version they had used to judge others. Jake kept talking to Ethan. The boy ate every word. Do they really go that fast? Fast enough that your stomach can make bad choices? Can they disappear off radar? Jake gave a theatrical look left and right. Nice try. Ethan held up his toy F-22 to the window and lined it against the real one outside. The taped wing and missing wheel should have made it look sad. Instead, against all that polished military power, the little toy somehow looked brave. Jake noticed it too. He crouched slightly. That's been through a lot. Ethan nodded. My mom gave it to me. Jake's expression softened at once. Then that's a serious aircraft. Daniel looked away before his face betrayed him. Jake straightened and turned toward Daniel again. Your son asks questions like he already speaks the language. Daniel kept his eyes on the flight line. He reads a lot. Not just reads. Jake studied him, processes. Daniel gave a neutral shrug. Jake was quiet for a moment, then he said it. So where did you fly? Victoria's head turned. Ethan's too. Daniel had known the question was coming. He just had not wanted it this soon. I didn't say I flew. Jake smiled faintly. No, you didn't. Daniel looked at him now. Really looked. Young, sharp, confident without being foolish. Good eyes. Better instincts than half the older officers Daniel had known. The kid had already put together too much. Still, Daniel tried one last sidestep. I fix engines now. Jake nodded. That wasn't my question. Ethan stared up at his father. There was no pressure in the boy's face, only hope. The kind that made lying feel worse. Daniel exhaled slowly. A long time ago, he said, I flew for the Air Force. Ethan blinked. You really did. Jake did not move. Daniel kept his voice flat. A long time ago. What did you fly? Ethan asked. Daniel should have answered with something vague, trainers, a transport, anything that would delay the truth, but the jets were right there beyond the glass, and the lie would have died in the hall anyway. He gave the smallest nod toward the flight line. Jake's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Ethan just stared. The Raptor. The boy whispered. Daniel nodded once. For 2 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then Ethan made a sound halfway between a laugh and a gasp. Dad. Daniel put a hand on the back of his neck. Yeah. You flew the real thing. Yeah. You never told me. Daniel looked down at him. I know. Why not? Because your mother was dying. Because I could not carry both lives at once. Because after I left, talking about it felt like talking about a dead man wearing my face. He did not say any of that. Instead, he chose the part a 7-year-old could hold. Because that was before, and then we had us. Ethan clutched the toy tighter. His eyes had turned bright in a way Daniel had not seen in months. Not just excitement, pride. Raw, overwhelming pride. Victoria pressed one hand lightly to her mouth. Jake stared at Daniel as if some internal file had just been opened and half the pages suddenly made sense. Okay, Jake said slowly. Now I know why the name bothered me. Daniel's jaw tightened. Jake set down his coffee on the windowsill without looking away. "Carter, you said Daniel Carter." "That's my name." Jake gave one short, disbelieving laugh. "Sir, I need to ask something, and this is either going to sound stupid or insane." Daniel already hated where this was going. "Ask." Jake's eyes dropped to the steel memorial band on Daniel's wrist. The one Daniel wore every day and thought about almost never because thinking about it too much could ruin a whole week. "Did anyone ever call you Hawk?" The hall went silent, not quiet, silent. Even the sounds from the terminal behind them seemed to pull back. Ethan looked from Jake to his father. Victoria did the same. Daniel did not answer at once, and that was answer enough. Jake's face changed first. The easy smile vanished. In its place came disbelief, then respect, then something close to shock. "Hawk 1, he said softly. Daniel looked out at the jets. "Not anymore." Jake took one step back, actually stepped back. "Sir." Daniel hated that word right then. "Lieutenant, don't." But Jake was no longer hearing him the same way. "You flew 94th before cross-tasking, didn't you?" Daniel said nothing. Jake kept going, voice low now, almost careful. "Panjshir engagement, Northern Corridor intercept. Weapons school still teaches your split decisions from that fight." Victoria frowned, lost already. Ethan was not lost at all. He looked at his father like the room had tilted and a hidden door had opened behind him. "Dad." Daniel rubbed his thumb against the edge of his memorial band. The steel felt cold even in the heat. He had not heard that call sign out loud in 3 years, not from another pilot, not in a place like this, certainly not in front of his son. Jake realized he was no longer guessing, he was confirming. "Oh my God," he said under his breath. Then louder toward the restricted side of the hall. "Miller." A second pilot in a flight suit appeared at the far end, halfway through saying something to someone behind him. "What?" Jake pointed. The other pilot looked irritated first, then curious, then fixed completely on Daniel. "No way." That was how it started, fast, too fast. The second pilot came closer, eyes narrowing, trying to match the worn jacket and mechanic's boots to whatever name he had heard in squadron stories or training briefs. Daniel almost turned and walked out. He probably would have if Ethan had not slid his small hand into his. The boy looked up at him with wonder and confusion mixed together. "Are you famous?" Ethan asked. Daniel shut his eyes for 1 second. "No," he said. Jake answered at the same time. "Yes." Daniel opened his eyes and gave him a flat look. Jake had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "Sorry, sir, but also not really." Victoria stared at Daniel as if she had been seated beside a live grenade for the last 2 hours and only now learned what it was. She took one small breath. "Who are you?" Daniel looked at her. The old version of him would have answered colder, sharper, let her sit in the weight of it, but he was tired and Ethan was listening and pride was useless if it turned you cruel. "I'm Ethan's father," he said. Victoria lowered her eyes first. That should have ended the moment. It did not, because doors were opening now from the restricted side of the hall. More boots, more flight suits. One crew chief in maintenance green. Somebody had already passed the name. Daniel could tell from the speed. Military rumor traveled like fire in dry grass. The second pilot stopped 3 feet away and looked Daniel over with naked disbelief. "Sir," he said, "if this is a joke, it's mean." "It's not a joke," Jake said. The pilot's eyes dropped to Daniel's wristband, then to the old scar near his jaw, then back up. His whole posture changed. He straightened without thinking. "Hawk 1, he said quietly. Daniel's face gave nothing away now. Ethan squeezed his hand harder. Victoria took a half step backward. The crew chief at the edge of the hall stared like he had seen a ghost, and Daniel understood all at once that the next few minutes were going to rip open the life he had kept sealed shut from his son. Not maybe. Not eventually. Now. Because somewhere beyond those doors, men who still spoke his old language were already coming. And this time, there would be no way to pretend the mechanic in worn boots was just a mechanic. The first man through the restricted door was not a pilot. He was maintenance. Late 50s. broad shoulders, green coveralls, gray at the temples, the kind of face built by heat, noise, and years on flight lines where mistakes cost blood. He stopped dead the moment he saw Daniel. For one long second, nobody moved. Then the crew chief took off his cap. "Hawk 1," he said, not loud, not dramatic, but the way he said it made every other voice in the hall die. Daniel knew him before the name tag came into focus. Patterson. He had been on the line at Bagram the night Daniel landed with almost no fuel left, and one system so chewed up the post-flight crew spent 6 hours just understanding how the aircraft had stayed airborne. Patterson had been there with wheel chocks and a flashlight and a face full of disbelief. 3 years vanished from the man's eyes in an instant. "Sergeant Patterson," Daniel said quietly. Patterson laughed once, rough and disbelieving. "You remember me. You cursed at me on the runway in front of 2 colonels. Hard to forget." That broke the tension just enough for a few stunned smiles to appear. Patterson shook his head. "Sir, those colonels were cursing too." Jake Rowlands looked between them like a man watching legend turn human in real time. Then more personnel appeared. A captain, another lieutenant, 2 crew chiefs, 1 major. They slowed as they entered the hall, and every face changed in the same sequence. Curiosity, recognition, shock. Ethan pressed himself against Daniel's side but did not hide. His eyes were huge. He was scared, but not in a bad way. More like the world had suddenly become much larger than he thought, and his father was at the center of it. Victoria stood a few feet back near the wall, forgotten by everyone but not by herself. Daniel could feel her watching every second, and that was fine. Let her watch. Let her see what hands like his had done before she decided they were not good enough for first class. The major stepped forward, 40s, hard face, wing commander patch, calm eyes. He looked at Daniel's memorial band, then at the scar near his jaw, then finally at his face. "Daniel Carter," he said, "tell me I'm wrong." Daniel gave a tired half smile. "You're not wrong, Major." The major let out a breath and laughed through it. "You've got to be kidding me." Jake looked almost offended. "Sir, I told you." "No," the major said without taking his eyes off Daniel. "You said Daniel Carter. You did not say Daniel Carter." Ethan tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Dad." Daniel looked down. "Yeah, buddy. Why do they all know you?" "Because I used to be someone else. Because I was never just someone else. Because the life I buried did not stay buried. He chose the truth that mattered most. Because a long time ago, I did a hard job with these people." Patterson gave a short snort. "Hard job, that's one way to say it." Jake finally crouched beside Ethan again. "Your dad was the real deal, kid." Daniel gave him a warning look. Jake lifted both hands. "Sorry, but also true." Victoria found her voice at last. "What exactly did he do?" No one answered her immediately, not out of cruelty, out of disbelief that she had to ask. The major turned his head just enough to include her. "He flew Raptors," he said, "at a level most pilots spend their whole career trying to reach." Victoria looked at Daniel's worn boots, his jacket, his hands, then back at the major. Daniel could almost hear her world rearranging itself. The major stepped closer. "Sir, I'm Major Collins." "Collins," Daniel repeated. "You fly here." "Yes, sir." "Then stop calling me sir. I'm a civilian." Collins smiled faintly. "Respectfully, that's going to be difficult." Patterson folded his cap in both hands and looked at Ethan. "This your boy?" "Yeah," Daniel said. Ethan held up the toy raptor like an introduction. "I'm Ethan." Patterson smiled the way men like him smiled at kids, not polished, real. "Good to meet you, Ethan." Jake pointed at the toy. "He's been carrying that thing all day." "My mom gave it to me," Ethan said. Something quiet passed through the group. Military people understood memory objects, understood the things people carried when love had nowhere else to go. Patterson crouched a little to get closer to Ethan's level. "Then that's not a toy, that's equipment." That made Ethan smile. Daniel felt his chest tighten. For the first time since boarding the flight, his son looked fully like a child again. Not guarded, not reduced, bright. The restricted door opened once more. This time the room changed before the man even crossed the threshold. Conversation stopped in the terminal beyond them. Two younger officers straightened automatically. Patterson took one step back without thinking. Colonel Marcus Briggs walked into the hall, silver at the temples now. Same build, same command in the shoulders, same eyes that could pin a room flat with one look. He stopped when he saw Daniel, not because he doubted it, because for half a second he simply could not quite believe the man was standing there in civilian clothes with grease on his hands and a little boy at his side. "Well," Briggs said softly, "I'll be damned." Daniel's mouth went dry. There were some people from an old life whose voices could still hit like a punch. "Colonel," he said. Briggs crossed the hall in 6 hard steps. Daniel thought maybe the man would offer a handshake. Instead, Briggs grabbed him and pulled him into a fierce, one-armed embrace that made the whole group grin like fools. 3 years, Briggs said roughly. 3 years, and this is where I find you." Daniel let out one breath that was almost a laugh. Apparently. When Briggs stepped back, his eyes were wet. He did not care who saw. Then he noticed Ethan. He looked down at the boy, then at the toy, then back at Daniel. "This your son?" "Yeah." Briggs crouched, and suddenly the base commander looked less like command and more like an old pilot meeting something precious. "I'm Colonel Briggs," he said. "Your father used to make my life very stressful." Ethan blinked, because he crashed planes. Half the hall laughed out loud. Briggs pointed at him. "No, son, because he kept doing impossible things and making paperwork longer." Ethan considered that. That sounds like him. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face. Victoria, still near the wall, looked as if she had forgotten how to stand. Briggs rose and looked Daniel over properly. The boots, the jacket, the hands, his expression softened. "You look tired." Daniel gave the smallest shrug. "Been a long few years." Briggs nodded once. He understood more than most. Sarah's illness, Daniel stepping away, the silence after. None of that needed to be explained in front of others. Then Briggs did something Daniel should have expected. He turned to the people gathered in the hall and said, "Gentlemen." That one word landed like a command, and everyone in uniform straightened. Daniel saw it happen a fraction too late. "Colonel, don't." Too late. Major Collins snapped to attention first, then Jake, then Patterson, slower but just as sharp. Then every pilot and crewman in the hall. Collins' voice rang out, "Hawk 1 on deck." The salute came up in a single wave. Crisp, precise, 20-some hands rising to brows in a military corridor that suddenly felt too small to hold the moment. Ethan looked around in shock. Victoria made a small sound Daniel did not quite catch. Daniel stood there in worn boots and shop-stained hands while some of the best people on that base saluted him like he had never left. His throat closed. Protocol said a civilian did not have to return it. Muscle memory said otherwise. His right hand rose before thought caught up. The salute locked in, held, and in the dead still center of that moment, Ethan looked up at his father and saw him standing straight in a way he had never seen before. Not tired. Not bent under bills and grief and double shifts. Not surviving. Standing like a man who remembered exactly who he was. Ethan's chin trembled. Then the boy, without anyone asking him, copied the motion and gave his own small salute beside his father. That broke the room. Jake looked away fast and laughed into his hand because his eyes had gone bright. Patterson openly wiped his face. Major Collins cleared his throat twice and failed to make it matter. Even Briggs turned his head for 1 second before facing front again. Daniel lowered his hand first. The others followed. Nobody spoke for a moment because nobody trusted their voice. Then Ethan asked the question only a 7-year-old could ask after something like that. "Dad," he said softly, "why didn't you tell me you were this kind of important?" Daniel knelt in front of him. He looked at his son, not the crowd. "Because none of that matters more than being your dad." Ethan frowned a little. "It matters some." Laughter moved through the hall, gentle and grateful. Daniel put both hands on the boy's shoulders. Maybe some. Briggs stepped closer. Son, your father once made pilots twice his size nervous and saved missions people still study. Ethan turned to him. Did he ever get scared? Briggs looked at Daniel before answering. The brave ones always do. Daniel rose slowly. His eyes swept the hall once and landed finally on Victoria Ashford. She had gone pale, not frightened now, ashamed, truly ashamed, not because Daniel had status. That part had shocked her because she now understood what made it worse. She had not insulted a nobody who turned out to be important. She had insulted a father in front of his son, and every honorable person in that hallway knew it. Daniel held her gaze for one quiet beat, then looked away. That hurt her more than anger would have. Briggs followed Daniel's glance and took in the woman instantly. Military commanders noticed everything. Problem? He asked quietly. Daniel answered just as quietly, handled. Briggs nodded. He trusted him. Then Ethan looked out through the reinforced window toward the flight line and whispered, almost like he was afraid to ask too much in one day, "Can I see one up close?" Every pilot in the hall smiled at once. Briggs did not even hesitate. "Yes," he said, and Victoria Ashford, who had told the boy to keep his toy hidden, now had to watch an Air Force colonel prepare to walk that same child onto a Raptor flight line. They walked onto the flight line like a small moving parade. Briggs in front, Jake Rowlands on Ethan's left, Patterson on his right, Daniel in the middle, one hand resting lightly on his son's shoulder as if he still did not fully trust the world not to take this moment away. Behind them came Major Collins, two younger pilots, and three maintenance men who had clearly found excuses to be nearby. Men did not usually abandon their work just to watch a child see a jet for the first time. They did today. Heat came off the concrete in soft waves. The air smelled like fuel, sun-baked metal, and the sharp, clean bite of hydraulics. To Daniel, it was the smell of another lifetime. To Ethan, it smelled like wonder. The nearest Raptor sat half in shadow beside an open maintenance bay. One side panel was lifted. A ladder rested against the fuselage. Ground equipment hummed nearby. The jet looked less like a machine up close and more like a decision made by men who had never once asked permission from gravity. Ethan stopped walking. The toy Raptor slipped from his fingers and hung by its taped wing against his leg. He just stared. "That's a real one," he whispered. Jake grinned. "That is a very real one." Ethan tilted his head back farther, and farther. "It's huge." Patterson folded his arms. "Funny thing is, son, every pilot who thinks he's bigger than the aircraft figures out quick he's not." Daniel let out a soft breath through his nose. "Still giving lessons, Sergeant." "Only the free ones." Ethan looked up at his father. "Did you fly one exactly like this?" Daniel walked closer to the jet and placed one hand on the skin near the intake. Warm from the sun, smooth, familiar, dangerous. "Yeah," he said quietly, "exactly like this." His hand stayed there a moment too long. Briggs noticed. Of course he noticed. But for once he said nothing. Captain Nunez emerged from the far side of the aircraft with a helmet bag in one hand. She was younger than Collins, sharp-eyed, steady, with the calm confidence of someone who trusted her training and did not need to announce it. She took in the scene fast, then looked at Ethan. "So this is the young man I've been hearing about." Ethan stood straighter at once. "I'm Ethan." She offered him a handshake like he was a person, not a child to be patted on the head. "Captain Elena Nunez." He shook it seriously. "Do you fly this one?" "Sometimes. Depends if she likes me that day." Ethan smiled. "Jets can like people." Nunez glanced at Daniel. "Your dad ever tell you machines have personalities?" Ethan nodded. "All the time." Daniel gave a tired half-smile. "He forgets nothing." "Good," Nunez said. "That's a useful trait around aircraft." She crouched beside Ethan and pointed out the nose, the canopy line, the angled tail surfaces, the intake geometry. She kept her words simple, but not childish. She explained like he could understand if she respected him enough to try. He could. Daniel watched his son follow every point with his eyes, already tracking systems, shape, function, not just beauty. Sarah would have loved this. That thought hit him hard and fast, but today it did not knock the air out of him. Today it stood beside him quietly. Then Briggs gave the order that changed the whole afternoon. Let him see the cockpit. Ethan turned so fast he nearly stumbled. Really? Nunez looked to Daniel, not Briggs. Daniel, that mattered. Daniel hesitated, not because he did not want Ethan to see it, because he wanted it too much. Because once some doors opened, they did not close politely again. Ethan's voice went small. Dad. Daniel looked at the boy, at the toy in his hand, at the patch Jake had given him tucked against his shirt, at the pure hope in his face. Yeah, Daniel said. Really? The smile that hit Ethan's face made every person on the line go softer at once. Patterson muttered, worth every paperwork headache already. Nunez lifted Ethan carefully onto the ladder, one hand steady at his back. Jake climbed one step behind just in case. Ethan moved slowly, reverently, like he was climbing into a church. When he reached the cockpit and looked down into it, he went quiet. No question, no joke, no sound at all. Then he whispered, Dad. Daniel stepped closer. Ethan looked down from the ladder with tears in his eyes and wonder all over his face. This is where you sat. The sentence hit harder than the salute had. Daniel swallowed once before answering. Yeah. Ethan climbed in under Nunez's guidance and lowered himself carefully into the seat. The helmet on the rail beside him looked absurdly large. His sneakers could not have reached half the controls. But the way he looked out through that canopy line, alert and intent and almost unbearably alive, made the aircraft seem like it had been waiting for him all day. Patterson stepped up beside Daniel. He looks right there. Daniel kept his eyes on Ethan. Don't start. I'm serious. Kids usually fidget. That one is studying. He was. Even now Ethan was scanning, looking at the displays, the angles, the shape of the controls, the view over the nose. Not pretending. Learning. Nunez pointed at the HUD. Ethan listened like his life depended on it. Jake shook his head and smiled. Lieutenant-level obsession, maybe captain-level. Briggs folded his arms. He's got his father's eyes when he's thinking. Daniel said nothing. He could not, because he knew Briggs was right. From the terminal side, a small group of diverted passengers had been allowed to view the line from behind a marked boundary. Airline staff probably thought it would calm them. Maybe it did. Maybe it just gave them a better story for dinner. Among them stood Victoria Ashford. She had made it all the way out here. Daniel saw her before she realized he had. She stood apart from the others, one hand on the strap of her leather bag, the other hanging uselessly at her side. No phone raised. No performance. No power posture. Just a woman watching a boy she had humiliated sit in the cockpit of the aircraft his father once flew for his country. The irony was brutal and clean. No revenge speech could have landed harder than that picture. Ethan in the cockpit, Daniel below him, pilots and crew around them, and Victoria outside the circle, forced to see exactly what she had failed to see at 30,000 feet. After a few minutes, Nunez helped Ethan back down. The boy hit the tarmac already talking. I saw the display and the side stick, and the angle was bigger than I thought, and the front view is amazing. And he stopped and threw both arms around Daniel's waist. It was so sudden Daniel almost lost balance. I sat where you sat. Daniel put his arms around him and held on. Yeah, buddy. You were really telling the truth. That made Briggs bark out a laugh. So did Jake. Even Patterson grinned. Daniel leaned back just enough to look at Ethan. What did you think I was doing? Building an entire fake military career to impress you later? Ethan considered that with complete seriousness. I don't know, adults are weird. The flight line laughed again. Then Ethan did something Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. He held up the battered little toy raptor and said, "Can we keep both?" Daniel blinked. Both what? This one and the real one. Jake nearly choked laughing. Briggs looked offended on behalf of federal property. Absolutely not, son. Ethan sighed heavily. Worth asking. Patterson reached into his pocket then, slow and deliberate. He pulled out a challenge coin, worn smooth at the edges from years of being carried. He held it out to Ethan. The boy looked at Daniel first. Daniel nodded. Ethan accepted it with both hands. What's this? Patterson turned it over so the crest caught the light. Maintenance detachment coin. Means you keep things flying. Means you show up. Means you do your job even when nobody claps. Ethan looked at the coin like it was treasure. Patterson glanced at Daniel. Your father understood that better than most. Daniel's throat tightened again. Sergeant. Patterson waved it off. Let me finish before I get old and sentimental. Too late for that, Daniel thought. Patterson looked at Ethan. You take care of that coin. And on days when people look at your dad's hands and think they know his worth, you remember something. Ethan waited. Patterson's voice dropped low and firm. The strongest people in the room are usually the ones who don't need to announce it. Ethan nodded like he had just been given a classified briefing. Then Victoria Ashford stepped forward from the boundary line. No one stopped her. Maybe because everyone sensed this was unfinished. Maybe because some endings needed witnesses. She approached carefully, as if the concrete itself might reject her. Her expensive shoes looked absurd out here. Her polished world did not belong on a hot military ramp, and for the first time she seemed to know that. She stopped a few feet from Daniel and Ethan. Her voice, when it came, was nothing like it had been on the plane. Mr. Carter. Daniel looked at her but did not speak. She turned to Ethan first. Good. That was the only way this could go. Ethan, I was cruel to you earlier. Her eyes dropped to the toy jet, then back to his face. You tried to show me something important and I treated it like trash. I was wrong. The boy held the coin in one hand and the toy jet in the other. He looked at Daniel. Daniel gave no signal this time. This was Ethan's moment, not his. Victoria went on, and now her voice shook. I spend my life around titles and contracts and people trying to prove they're important. I looked at your father and judged him by his clothes and his hands. Then I looked at you and treated your kindness like an inconvenience. She swallowed hard. There is no excuse for that. No one on the line moved. Even Briggs stayed silent. Victoria drew one breath. I'm sorry. Ethan studied her with the serious face children wore when they sensed honesty mattered. Then he lifted the toy jet a little. It's an F-22 Raptor, he said. Victoria nodded. I know. My mom gave it to me before she died. Pain crossed Victoria's face, clean and visible. I know that now. It's not cheap. No, she said, it isn't. The boy looked down at the coin in his other hand, then back at her. You made my dad sad too. That landed harder than anything Daniel could have said. Victoria's composure broke for 1 second. Only one, but everyone saw it. Yes, she whispered. I did. Ethan took in her face, the tears she was trying not to show, the shame, the truth of it. Then he gave the kind of answer only children and the very wise ever managed. Okay, he said. Victoria blinked. Okay. I forgive you, but you should be nicer sooner. Jake made a sound halfway between a laugh and a choke. Patterson turned away to hide his grin. Even Briggs's mouth twitched. Victoria actually let out a broken laugh through the tears. Yes, I should. Daniel finally spoke. That's the smartest thing said all day. Ethan leaned against his father, satisfied. Victoria looked at Daniel then. I was wrong about everything. Daniel shook his head once. No, you were wrong about one thing that poisoned the rest. You looked at my hands and thought dirt meant less. His voice stayed calm, but every person on that line felt the force in it. These hands fixed trucks, packed school lunches, held my wife when she was dying, and before any of that they flew combat missions. Hands don't lose value because they work. No one said a word after that. They did not need to. It was already the line people would remember. Victoria lowered her head, not dramatically, not performative, just enough to show she had heard him fully. Then she stepped back, not erased, not redeemed in some fake perfect way, just changed. That was enough. A transport van approached from the terminal side. Airline staff climbed out. Replacement aircraft ready. Time to go. The ordinary world, impatient as ever, had come to drag the day forward. Ethan looked stricken at once. "We have to leave." Briggs crouched to his level. "Afraid so, son." "Can I come back?" Briggs looked at Daniel before answering. "That depends on your father." Daniel frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Briggs stood and faced him fully now, commander and old friend both. "It means I'm not letting you vanish again," he said. "My pilots study your decisions in classrooms. They argue over your judgment calls. Half of them think the stories are exaggerated. Come down here 2 days a month, teach, debrief, show them how real thinking works when the sky goes bad." Daniel stared at him. The offer hit like the opening of a sealed hatch. Briggs kept going. "Part-time, flexible, bring Ethan when school allows it. I don't care how we structure it. But I'm done watching the Air Force lose men like you to silence." Jake looked like Christmas had come early. Nunez said nothing, but the hope in her face said enough. Patterson folded his arms. "Wouldn't hurt having somebody around who knows the difference between confidence and luck." Daniel looked at the jet, at Ethan, at his own hands, old life, current life, not enemies maybe. Maybe that had been the mistake all along. Ethan tugged his sleeve. "Dad." "Yeah. You stood taller here." The words went straight through him, not because they were poetic, because they were precise. Children told the truth with almost no waste. Daniel looked at Briggs. "I can't answer today." Briggs nodded once, then "Answer soon." The van doors opened. Time was up. Jake bent and handed Ethan a squadron patch. Nunez shook his hand like he was still part of the team. Patterson touched 2 fingers to his temple at Daniel, informal and deeply felt. Major Collins said it had been an honor. Briggs clasped Daniel's shoulder hard enough to say what he did not say out loud. Then Daniel and Ethan started back toward the terminal. Halfway there, Ethan looked over his shoulder at the line of F-22s, then up at his father. "Dad." "Yeah. I think Mom knew." Daniel felt the question inside the statement. "Knew what?" "That I would need to know who you really are." Daniel looked at the little boy, holding a toy jet in one hand and a challenge coin in the other. Then he looked back once at the flight line, at the men saluting with respect in their eyes, at the life he had not lost so much as locked away. Maybe Sarah had known. She usually did. Daniel squeezed Ethan's shoulder gently and kept walking. "Maybe she did," he said. And behind them, on a hot Texas flight line under a wide military sky, the dirty-handed single dad the world had tried to shrink walked away, not smaller, but seen.